Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. Today's video is the second in my State of the Game series, where I take a big picture look at Dragalia Lost, the meta, and any recent updates or events. My first State of the Game came out a week after Dragalia Lost launch, so a few weeks have passed and there's a lot to talk about. There are 3 topics I want to discuss today, with timestamps in the comment below and visible on screen now. First, I will look back on the Loyalties Requiem raid event, then I will discuss builds in the current unit pool, and finally, I'll touch on hidden and advanced gameplay mechanics. Let's start with the Loyalties Requiem raid event, since that's absorbed most of my, and many others, playtime since it launched on October 4th. With the raid now closed, allow me to share my overall thoughts and impressions. I would say the Loyalties Requiem raid was good, but not great as far as events go. There are a lot of positives deserving of praise. The raid story was better than I expected, the music and presentation maintained the high bar set by Dragalia Lost so far, and Celiera's adventure story was truly a delight. It was also fairly easy to max out Celiera's friendship at 500, with myself and many others doing so on the first day of the event. Pele and Paladin Defender were a bit harder to get multiple copies of, but it was still possible with consistent play. As an aside, I also want to apologize for mispronouncing Pele as Pel in my previous videos. I've also been told that I misstated Celiera's name, and it's actually pronounced celery. Jokes aside, I am genuinely sorry for mispronouncing Pele's name, and I think it's awesome to see different mythologies reflected in Dragalia Lost, with both Pele and Poliahu repping Hawaii. Back to the raid, the next positive was that rewards were plentiful and created a nice feedback loop. Blazing Summons granted water orbs, mana, and level up fodder, allowing players to further strengthen their raid teams and thereby slowly accrue more bronze, silver, and gold emblems. On top of these rewards, there were daily and limited endeavors, and players also received a 10-fold summon voucher, quality honey, and blessed ashes to commemorate the event's launch. And those weren't the only free gifts players received during the raid either. The Dragalia Lost support team was excellent at communicating and responding to player feedback on a couple of major issues, even providing gifts to compensate players, which bodes well for future events. While those issues weren't fully resolved and are part of why I feel like the raid was good but not great, receiving extra blessed ashes and extra gold emblems was a step in the right direction. On that note, let me get into my constructive criticism for the event. When the raid started, its difficulty was too high on expert and special, seemingly balanced for players who knew each other rather than randoms from a lobby. Thankfully, the difficulty was lowered and the gold emblem drop rate was raised, making the event accessible to more players. At the same time, a deathless or 1 minute clear of the special map still provided a solid challenge. But while I think the difficulty reached just the right point, I still feel the gold emblem rewards were too stingy. I know some players got there, but I genuinely believe the max of 6,000 was too high. I would like to see the ceiling lowered to 3,000, but I do appreciate the average player isn't meant to get all of the rewards. I also found myself thankful the reward scheme included several good stopping points, like 400 gold emblems for a Champion's Testament or 1,600 for a Sunlight Ore. But I still felt gold emblems were earned too slowly, and this leads to my second point of criticism. The raid stopped feeling fun to play after a time, and drifted into pure grind territory. Maybe future raids should last 1 week rather than nearly 2 weeks, because fighting the boss every hour just grew monotonous. The problem was compounded by matchmaking issues. So many more players were hosting rooms than joining them, leading to long wait times. What made matters worse is that trolls or unprepared teams could exacerbate the already lengthy grind process, since there's no way to kick players who've joined a room. Weaker might teams who actually were prepared also had a harder time finding allies when hosting, getting typecast by might alone. This problem had 2 major sources in my view. The dev team's gift addressed one of these sources directly. Gather Wings restore much more slowly than stamina, leading more players to host than to join. Since daily endeavors were available for both hosting once and for joining once, this did nothing to offset the skewed ratio. The other source is that matchmaking lacks a few key quality of life features. Letting the host kick players is probably the easiest solution to trolls. It may not be the nicest thing in the world, but neither is getting noped to oblivion until you leave. Going back to the overall point that the raid stopped feeling fun to play, allow me to clarify a bit. When the raid first started, it was genuinely exciting. It took time to learn Fragonoth's patterns, and I felt myself getting better and better at dodging, damaging, and defeating him. It gave me a purpose to strive for, and helped direct how I spent my resources, and strengthened my teams. But after a certain point, battles became routine. Tail, volcano, legs, body, and even if my AI companions died, it didn't matter much unless I was going for the no-death endeavors. I only earned 1600 gold emblems, so I can't say I ever reached a point of true mastery with my free-to-play water team. But part of the reason for that was the raid just lost its luster to me after playing it so much, and I lost my desire to continue grinding. To end on a more positive note, since once again, I did like the raid all in all, let me mention one big exception to this. It was an absolute thrill getting the 1-minute epithet, which I narrowly obtained in the final hours of the raid thanks to a huge assist from our Discord community. I also loved the theory crafting, videos, and discussions about how to get the 1-minute epithet overall. And speaking of theory crafting, let me pivot toward the next main topic for this video, builds and the current unit pool. One big change since my previous state of the game is a personal one. Namely, I've done a ton more reading and research on Dragalia Lost over the past few weeks. My first state of the game included more or less my blind impressions of Dragalia Lost after a week of playing, and I deliberately tried to dodge other content in order to avoid spoilers. I still do this to some extent to keep my opinions original. For example, I've still never viewed any site's tier lists. In making my character and banner review videos, however, I have taken in a lot of raw data, and that has shaped my thoughts on the game along the way. Having parsed through so much, I want to point out a few trends. These may be obvious to you, but they were pretty revelatory for me, and they color my long-term predictions for Dragalia Lost. Let's go through these quickly. Gacha pulls have higher stats and generally better abilities than almost all free or story units. Higher rarity means better in Dragalia Lost. Base 5 stars are better than 4 stars, which are better than 3 stars, even with high investment. There are many patterns and cycles. Examples include 3-star drakes and imps, 4-star story dragons, etc. Weapons aren't really a build consideration at full investment, 5 stars, and the choice is an illusion. Current stat distributions and totals provide a ceiling on team might and hence content difficulty. Now let me mention why I think these points matter for the future of Dragalia Lost. To begin, let's consider the consequences of gacha and higher rarity meaning more power. This should be at least somewhat expected, since players do need reasons to pull on new showcases and should feel special and rewarded for summoning rare units. The problem as I see it is that lower rarity or free units never really catch up, even if you decide to spend all of your resources on them and invest heavily into them. This makes me think there could be some refinements to weaker characters down the road to bring them to par with other units, or to the gacha rates themselves to make rarer units slightly easier to get. And when I say units here, I mean that as broadly as possible, since even dragons and wyrmprints of higher rarity outclass lower rarity ones in general, not to mention special items exist for unbinding 5-star dragons and wyrmprints. Next, when it comes to cycles, my main prediction stems from the fact that many cycles are currently incomplete. I suspect that every element will get dragons at both 4-star and 5-star rarity that raise just HP, just strength, and both strength and HP, so any existing holes will be filled. I think we'll probably get dragons like this before any super flashy stuff comes out. I also think we'll get a cycle of wyrmprints, which grant elemental res and ailment res. Basically, think of what Fireside Gathering did for burn and flame res, but for other elements and ailments. Now when it comes to weapons, the one bummer in building characters is that every character has a clear best choice at their maximum. Each weapon type has a single 5-star of each element, which is basically the de facto best pick for a character of that weapon and element combination. Attuning the user's element with the weapon increases its stat boost by 50%. It allows the user to unleash the weapon's skill, and this is on top of elemental weapons already having higher base stats. The truth is that actually getting to 5-star elemental weapons takes a huge amount of time and resources, so by the time most players are crafting those weapons, a lot will have happened in the game. But my hope is that we get more options to allow for greater variety in builds. And if some of the data mined images from the game's Halloween event are anything to go by, it looks like we just may. Last up for this part of the video, let me talk about stat distributions and might. This provides the clearest evidence that 3 stars are generally weaker than 4 stars, which are generally weaker than 5 stars, and that free units are generally weaker than gacha units. There are also many other BST patterns, with plenty of Wyrmprints and dragons having similar totals, but different splits among HP and strength. The other knowledge we obtain from this is about the game's current might ceiling and power creep. My rough calculation is that the highest might a single adventurer can achieve is about 5,935 on Julieta. Therefore, the highest possible might for a co-op team is something just below 24,000 might, placing a ceiling on how hard quests can be made for the time being. If we start to see units with higher BST than Julieta, we'll know we're entering into power creep range. My main hope when it comes to these observations is that we'll see more variety in Dragalia Lost as it's updated. Why not let 3 stars compete with 5 stars with high enough investment? 3-star units are already more costly to build since they must be promoted anyway. Why not give us dragons with more unique skills, like Phoenix, rather than filling out designs across elements? Why not give us a few more weapons to work with, or a greater variety of Wyrmprints? Fortunately, I do think player choice will slowly expand as the game goes on. Besides that, since there's no PvP, using your favorite unit with worse stats is just fine, as long as they're still strong enough to clear the content you're working on. Alright, and that brings us to the last topic for this video, hidden and advanced gameplay mechanics. Over the past few weeks, there's been a fair amount of research, discovery, trial, and error as to how various mechanics work in Dragalia Lost, some of which is pretty fascinating. A lot has yet to be fully uncovered, and much has yet to be fully mastered by the average player, myself included. But here are a few of the things I have in mind here. First up, GamePress data miners have uncovered more details on how might is calculated, including how much might skills and abilities count for. Might is just a summary statistic, just the shorthand for power, so I won't dwell on this part. Might's only functional use is in unlocking gated content, so knowing skill might values can help those on the bubble. The more interesting piece is about skill damage. Gamepedia now lists damage multipliers for various skills, allowing more precise comparisons than were previously possible. The in-game descriptions for skills are pretty vague, even if the skill icon does tell you a little about the skill's general AoE hit pattern. Knowing how much damage skills do, particularly skills with similar hit patterns, is a game changer in comparing units. The only missing link at this point is cooldown information and how fast different skills, basic attacks, and force strikes build up the gauges. Now let's talk about how different abilities stack. This was a huge topic of discussion during the Loyalty's Requiem raid, as a popular strategy emerged to stack the Shapeshift Prep ability across team members in order to transform into a dragon quickly and defeat the boss in under a minute. What's peculiar is that nowhere in the in-game Shapeshift Prep description does it say that the ability works for the whole team, let alone across multiple teams for something like the raid. But that's exactly how it functioned. It's still unclear to me exactly how abilities stack and which abilities stack across adventurer or team lines. For instance, buffs seemed team-specific within the raid, yet healing worked across all teams. But we can start to narrow down how single adventurer stacking works to a certain extent. Multiple copies of abilities do stack on a single adventurer, so you can use Wyrmprints to double down on adventurers' innate kits. What's a bit less clear is whether stacking is additive or multiplicative. It's almost certainly additive for something like skill prep, since that starts from a base of 0, but it could be multiplicative and hence slightly better for things like skill damage or force strike damage. Thank you to our Discord community for helping test this. Moving on, we come to the light and shadow elements. The main thing I want to point out here is a clarification on something I had been unsure about for a while. Credit to Redditor Linark for pointing this out, with their post linked in the description below. But light and shadow don't work like the other elements when it comes to strengths and weaknesses. The relationship isn't a double-edged sword, nor is it a neutral one. Basically, the game always resolves this matchup in the player's favor. That means that player-controlled light units take less damage from and deal more damage to shadow foes, and at the same time, player-controlled shadow units take less from and deal more to light foes. The major implication of this is that light and shadow units have an inherent advantage over those in the wind, water, flame triangle since they have no weaknesses. After some reflection, I do think this benefits tanks the most, then squishier healers and support units, and finally attackers. But in the end, the best option will still be to use a team of the element effective against a given quest. Finally, the last two topics, gauge mechanics and iframes, are really where I see advanced players pushing their capabilities within the game. If you aren't aware of this, activating skills provides a few moments of invulnerability against everything but purple enemy attacks. This invulnerability extends to your whole team, making it a great way to protect helpless AI units. And when it comes to AI, I've also noticed players getting much better at manipulating the enemy AI. Fighting the raid boss so many times, you start to notice how to abuse it, and the same applies to modes like the Dragon Trials. As the raid went on, more and more hosts would go left at the start of the battle to turn the boss and expose its leg or tail to other players' teams. I see learning more about how the AI works, both enemy and ally, as a really exciting aspect of the game. The other bit of optimization I've seen relates to managing gauges and using force strikes. Each weapon type has a unique force strike, and different ones deal bonus damage to overdrive gauges at different rates. This means that using force strikes rather than basic attack combos can allow players to break bosses faster, then inflict even more damage. The question is, what string of basic attacks and force strikes is best to achieve various goals, building your own meters, dealing damage, and diminishing overdrives. I've seen weapon-specific analysis start to pop up about doing 2 or 3 normal hits and interrupting with a force strike, especially since the 1-minute clear of the raid boss was rather demanding, and it's cool to see combo and meter optimization come into play. Unfortunately, this can also require a lot of dexterity to pull off consistently. That's a good thing in that personal skill and getting good matter, but if you haven't already noticed, this game is pretty tough to play on a commute. To close this section and wind down the video, I'll add that personally, I am barely scratching the surface of these more advanced mechanics where I'm at in the game. My highest might team is close to 11,000, my Halidom is about to hit facility level 300, and there's still a ton of content for me to complete. I'm more intrigued about what these advanced and hidden mechanics mean for the future of Dragalia Lost, rather than at a point to incorporate them in my day-to-day play. And I think that leads into the conclusion nicely. The state of Dragalia Lost remains strong, even if there is noticeable room for improvement. Matchmaking can be an issue, and it seems like the player base may have declined a bit following launch hype, slowing matchmaking down. Since my last video, we got our first major event, and I think it was good overall. While certain aspects didn't appeal to me, the thing that keeps hitting me is how many ways there are to enjoy this game. Maybe you don't care about builds or theory crafting, and you want to play with your favorite character. Maybe you just want to grab Celiera and bounce if you're short on time. Or maybe you want to go all out and try get the fastest clear you can on the special raid boss. There's so much player choice, and honestly, there are no wrong answers. Because there's no PvP, how much time you spend and what rewards you collect are ultimately up to you. At the same time, when it comes to the long-term health of the game, I hope we continue to see even more variety when it comes to gear and the viability of weaker adventurers. There are pretty clear patterns and cycles when it comes to filling out Wyrmprints and dragons, but I hope we eventually get more options that break the mold and more content that pushes us to think creatively. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and checking out my channel. I greatly appreciate the many of you who have chosen to subscribe and stick around, and I'm constantly impressed by the positivity and team spirit on display in the comments and over on the Discord, which I've linked to in the description below. Dragalia Lost's next big event, Trick or Treasure, is just around the corner, and it was announced in-game that it will launch at reset the night of Tuesday, October 16th, going into Wednesday, October 17th. The current summon showcase for Lily and Leviathan ends then, so you have a few days to pull before the new showcase begins. You can expect my review of the new showcase, Halloween Fantasia, on Wednesday, so I hope you're looking forward to it. With that said, thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time!